Dear Britain, today, as I speak, an extraordinarily bad Prime Minister is being replaced by one who, if his record is anything to go by, will be even worse and even more divisive. Our country is in danger. 3 years ago, we divided down the middle over whether to leave the European Union. And since then, far from being resolved, that split has only deepened. Now, the Joker is taking over our country, and we all have to confront the very real risk of a no-deal Brexit. Boris Johnson denies this, but we all know he only says what he thinks people want to hear. What matters is what he does. And what he is doing is aligning the United Kingdom with Donald Trump's White House. Mr. Trump and his advisors have declared that the European Union is their foe. They will offer Mr. Johnson a generous treaty and immediate support if he goes for a no-deal Brexit, and we will be reduced to mercenaries in any number of American trade wars. And not just trade wars. The Americans effectively lured British forces into a dangerous trap to seize and continue to hold an Iranian tanker. In retaliation, to the delight of the White House, Iranian forces have seized a ship that sails under the British flag. We have now been co-opted onto the front line of Washington's confrontation with Iran. And by threatening serious consequences without having any real idea of what that might mean, we are moving dangerously close to war. Isolated from our European allies, we risk simply becoming a satellite of US foreign policy. That is not what anyone voted for 3 years ago. That will not take back control or rescue our democracy. And far from bringing our country together, it will divide us even more, especially if Mr. Johnson uses the threat of war to mobilise support. So how can we overcome this grave threat? We want good relations with both the United States and the European Union. And if both are far from perfect, well, who are we to talk? Let's be modest as well as realistic. We like them both, we need them both. But right now, they represent competing approaches and are the world's two greatest economic zones. We are not strong enough to be neutral in any contest between them, should President Trump continue on his course of polarisation. This means we have to decide the kind of future we want and the values we want to underpin it. I believe that our closest partners should be our fellow Europeans, with whom we have collectively forged peace and sought to tackle some of the greatest challenges of our time, foremost among them, the climate crisis. The alternative will mean that we become an appendage of the United States, which in this era of Trump means belligerent bullying, racist dog whistling, climate denial, and dismantling the very foundations of our democracy. But if we must choose, then how we choose is of vital importance. We have to go about it in a way that inspires support within and across all of the communities, all of the classes and regions and nations and generations of the United Kingdom. Yet our political leaders are incapable of addressing the causes of our country's crisis, the choices we need to make, with the honesty and the clarity that are essential to bring us together. Instead, they offer fatuous phrases about putting Brexit behind us, which will only ensure that it carries on. Fellow Britons, we have to take the time to understand what is going wrong. Otherwise, we will condemn ourselves to perpetual division as we repeat ourselves. And if no one else is going to be honest about it, then I must be. The last 3 years have been a phony Brexit. The real arguments over and consequences of Brexit are, I'm afraid, only just beginning. And in order to be clear about what is at stake, we must talk together across our nations and across our disagreements. Not just our own side. At the start of this year, I congratulated Leave voters on giving the establishment a good kicking in 2016 in response to their arrogance and complacency. And I repeat my thanks now. Since then, I've travelled across the UK to talk with Leave voters and, crucially, to listen. I've seen with my own eyes the places that are home to you and that make you proud. And I've shared your feelings of resentment and rage at your sense of your own powerlessness, at how you are in fact routinely ignored and denied a say in the decisions that matter. Like all of us, in the EU referendum you were asked to make a choice. You did so, and you made a brave and unexpected call. You were promised that it would be carried through, and this has not happened. The whole process has been a democratic outrage. Feelings about decades of neglect and inequality were channeled into one oversimplified question. The refusal to spell out the huge consequences and significance of what it actually meant, whether for remain or for leave, and today's failure and continued lack of honesty. From the start, I argued that we must build on the democracy of the referendum with more democracy. My view was, let us see what kind of Brexit can be negotiated, and let the country, not the politicians, then decide if that is indeed the outcome they actually want. Now, some on the Remain side are quoted as saying, can't we just stop and start all over again like we were before? Like you, however, I want there to be no going back. Instead, we have to change. And we, the people, have the right to say what that really means. Let me repeat that. The way the country is run has to change, and we, the voters, have the right to decide how. Just as we have the right, in the face of the evidence, to change our minds if we so choose. The biggest deceit of the Brexit referendum was that the choice was not spelt out. Instead, there were competing visions of what the promised Brexit might actually be. 3 years later, there is still no clear vision of what Brexit means, and the UK is even more deeply and damagingly divided. We need leadership based on honesty and integrity. And what have we got instead? A new Prime Minister whose casual disregard for the truth is legendary, whose judgment is appalling, who blows with the prevailing political winds, who lets others resign first before he follows, who described Theresa May's EU agreement as a turd and then voted for it, who will not rule out a shutdown of Parliament, apparently in the name of taking back control, to force through a damaging no-deal Brexit. It is hard to imagine a politician less qualified to assume the premiership in such dangerous and divided times. The Labour Party has a different leadership crisis. It has failed to seize the opportunity and to set out a programme of real democratic renewal, which is what Brexit is all about. It has failed to put country before party and has instead retreated into tactics when what we need is a principled strategy. And nor is bollocks to Brexit the answer, writing off as it does with such contempt half the country. Half the country who are rightly angry at the establishment for decades of neglect and at the austerity imposed upon them by the coalition government. The result is that we are bereft of coherent nationwide opposition. Now, I'm the only elected parliamentary representative of the Green Party, and we are the only UK-wide party that is both being honest with you and which knows what it thinks. It therefore falls to me to issue a warning. Boris Johnson and his supporters do not represent the vote a majority took 3 years ago. Instead, he and Nigel Farage are playing the game of President Trump, who wants to use us as a battering ram against Europe. Now, with the money and the media behind him, Mr. Johnson may well be the Prime Minister who does implement Trump's wishes and ensures that the UK crashes out. Now, I want all of you, especially Leave voters, to help make sure that he does not get his way in the country at large. He may have to call an election, and the surest way he can win a majority is by striking some kind of electoral pact with the Brexit Party. Now, that is the outcome Trump wants, and it's also guaranteed to stop any democratic movement in its tracks. Power will remain in the hands of the few, and our voices will continue to be locked out of decisions about the future. Now, I know this is not what you voted for 3 years ago, but the battle over Brexit is about another kind of struggle too, one for the future of our country and of our planet. Now, we can choose to be led by Boris Johnson, or we can choose another kind of leadership. One that is principled, one that is inclusive, one that gives us all a real say and a real voice. A leadership that ensures Leave voters and Remain voters identify with what we have in common and find a new identity for ourselves as a country, so that we can achieve an overwhelming shift in public opinion against a Trump Brexit. It means Remainers and Leavers together must find a way forward that a decisive majority in this country can back. Now, I still believe that to make a real difference, we do need to be part of the European Union. And at the same time that we've got to look at our own democracy, because it is deeply flawed, and too many of our political leaders are untrustworthy. The call to take back control was justified, but now we have to work through what it can mean. We need to come together to demand voting reform so that our votes always count. We need to talk about how England has been deprived of that kind of democratic government. It is the absence of any English representation that has led to so many turning their frustration against Brussels instead. Whether there is a strong sense of enjoying democratic representation, as there is in Scotland, as there is in London, as there is in Dublin, then people have the self-confidence to feel at ease with sharing sovereignty with Europe. We will not win the future unless we all are genuine democrats, unless we all refuse to tolerate a return to rule by the old elite in whatever form. The next 3 months, until October 31st, will put our democracy to the test in a way that it has never been tested before. My fellow citizens, Boris Johnson has compared the EU to Hitler's project of Nazi domination. That is shameless nonsense. The countries of Europe are more free and more themselves than at any time before. The menace now is from the other side of the Atlantic. We need to be smart and we need to cooperate. We need to put our political differences aside to prevent a disgraceful and humiliating Brexit that only serves Trump's cause. All I can tell you, as the solitary Green MP, is this: that we will ride out the storm and outlive the menace if necessary for years. At any rate, this is what we're going to try to do. Yes, I am quoting Winston Churchill, and that is what he told the country when he promised that we would fight tyranny on the beaches, the fields and the streets. At any rate, he said, at any rate, this is what we are going to try to do. There was no bluster, no false jollying, just hard determination. And that is what we need. And that is what I want to offer in the months that lie ahead. My name is Caroline Lucas, and I'm changing the conversation about Brexit.